Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Little Boy by dphoneworld.com. I grew up in a rural area that at one time bore witness to an atrocity carried out by native tribesmen and the European settlers living there. I'm not sure if that had anything to do with what I'm about to tell you, but when I was a child of maybe 6 or 7 years, my bed was situated against a bank of windows, and I would always lay looking out into the night until I fell asleep. One very moonlit evening as I lay there, I distinctly remembered seeing the shadow of a boy run across our yard. That was extremely odd, given that our house sat atop a small hill approximately 150 feet from the road. Being a child, I wanted to run outside after him. But he moved so quickly that he was gone before I even stood up from my bed. As the years went on, I thought about that many times and wondered if it was just my youthful imagination. Fast forward till now, and I'm 16, and I had started sneaking cigarettes from my mother's pack and was out sitting on some concrete steps enjoying one of my little smokes and keeping close eyes and ears against being caught smoking by my parents. And that's when it happened again. I'll be damned if that shadow didn't run past again quickly and silently, not 10 feet from where I sat. Mind you, there was no physical body to have cast a shadow, no sound of feet falling on the lawn, just an unmistakable silhouette of a child running as fast as he could across the lawn toward a thick section of woods that ran along the northern line of our property. I was blown away, to say the least, but I didn't mention it to anyone for several days, until one night I brought it up to my older sister, who, by the way, seemed to be an antenna for supernatural events, who at once lost all color in her face, abandoning all cheerful expression. She looked at me blankly and said, "You see him too." Apparently, this little apparition appeared as a solid living boy of about 9 or 10, wearing overalls with a well-worn newsboy-style hat on his head. He beckoned to the girls to follow him into the woods, and only females saw him in that form, and as far as I know, I'm the only one to see him as a shadow running. After I explained to my sister what it was that I saw, not a full figure of a child, but merely the shadow cast by an unseen body, she informed me that our older sister had seen him too, and several of their friends, my mother and 3 of my aunts. I asked my cousin about it years later, and before I could finish the question, she described the boy in the overalls and hat just as my sister had years before. And if that's not creepy enough, a couple of years back I was hired to do an electrical installation at the new home of the daughter of one of the girls who used to frequently visit our farm. This girl had stayed in touch with my mother and continued visiting my mom even after my sister married and moved away. One morning, as I prepared myself for work, she approached me. She asked if I was aware that she often visited my parents' home with her mother when she had been a girl. I said I did remember her being there with her mother, and then out of nowhere she said, "Did you ever see a little boy in overalls over by the woods?" That gave me quite a shock, as nobody had mentioned that in many years. I guess he's still out there, though all of us have gone. He's still running through the deep night from some danger long ago, and trying to entice the girls to follow him into that small patch of woods. Creepy Fedex Driver by Whisperwhite222. This is a bit long, so stick with me. I'm a 23-year-old female, and I'm a bartender. I have some crazy stories where I've been genuinely scared for my life, but this one has to be the worst. I was working a double at my restaurant, and around 11 a.m. a delivery man came in with a package that I had to sign for. He came in, I signed for the package, and told him to have a good day with a smile, and I continued my shift as usual. This was a Friday or Saturday, I can't remember specifically, but later on in the day we got busy. The restaurant and parking lot were full. I see a lot of different people daily, and plus seeing someone, for the second time ever, out of their uniform, I didn't really recognize him. The Fedex driver came and sat at the bar, and I obviously didn't remember him from the 25-second interaction we had already had that morning. I started talking to him as I did all my customers, and I got him a drink, appetizer, and another drink, and then an entree. Our conversation started with him saying, "How long have you worked here?" I said, "A few years. I've worked my way up." "Well, how do you like it here?" I mean, just regular conversation with a bar guest. But it slowly became not so regular. He asked me if I had a boyfriend, and I said yes. He would change the subject and then go back, compliment me saying how beautiful I was every few minutes. Then he asked, "Can I have your phone number?" I said, "No, I don't think my boyfriend would appreciate that." And he replied with, "Okay, well, what's your last name? We could just be Facebook friends." It was annoying, but they're normal interactions that I've had with lots of men in this industry. But then he started to become really pushy over time, pressing for my phone number or social media accounts. I continued to politely decline and laugh it off. He then told me, "I actually came this morning to drop off a package with FedEx. You signed for it. I came back just for you." I smiled and continued with my stupid customer service and said, "Oh yeah, I remember you." Just smile and laugh it off, I thought. I even stepped in the back to vent at my manager at that point, about how this guy was being extra pushy and uncomfortable. Fast forward about an hour, and he paid his tab and left. I was just glad he was gone at that point. We'll say, as a guess, it was about 7 p.m. when he left. We were still busy, and we close at 10. We finished dinner service, and customers slowly started to leave, and the restaurant was finally empty. I'd been cleaning up for a while, and I was finally finishing up, and it was around 10:30 at that point. I was still just finishing up at the bar, and I looked up, and the whole front of the restaurant that I was facing consists of large windows that face the parking lot, and I saw one car in the parking lot. And I noticed that the delivery driver, guest from earlier, was standing outside of that car, walking around it, and seeming like he was cleaning out the back seat. He had both doors open and was leaning in and out with a bag. As soon as I realized it was him who had left almost 4 hours earlier, my heart sank. Why was he still there? Why was he cleaning his back seat out? I freaked out. My manager and I were the only people left in the restaurant at that point, and it was almost 11. I ran to her and told her everything, about how the guy came back just for me, and about how he had seemingly left 4 hours earlier, and I made her come from the back of the restaurant to behind the bar up front so she could see him in the parking lot. I don't know, waiting for me? My manager said she was going to call the police, and at that point my boyfriend and I had an apartment literally 5 minutes away from the restaurant. I told her to not worry about it, that I would just call him to come and get me, and I did just that. But my boyfriend could immediately tell something was wrong, and when I'm scared or anxious, I ramble. So I gave him a quick debriefing of what had happened. He said he would be there soon and hung up, and my manager made me sit in the office until he got there, so I didn't see all of this go down. All I do remember is my boyfriend coming into the restaurant to get me, walking me to the car through the back door, and getting me home. My boyfriend, who is very confrontational and protective, later told me that he pulled into the parking lot to see the FedEx driver sitting in the driver's seat of his car. My boyfriend walked up to the car and knocked on the window for him to roll it down. He did, and my boyfriend told him something along the lines of, "You need to get out of here." And that's when the scariest thing happened. The dude responded to him in a different language, mumbling and acting like he didn't speak English. My boyfriend said something like, "I know you speak English. You've been talking to my girlfriend all night. You need to get out of here." The dude continued to ramble in a different language until my boyfriend raised his voice and basically said, "You have 15 seconds before I pull you out of this car and you never leave this parking lot." The guy finally put his car in drive and sped off. I was on edge for weeks after that interaction and even considered switching jobs. I mean, why was he still in the parking lot that long after closing and hours after cashing out his tab? And why was he cleaning his back seat? To that creepy bar guest delivery driver, let's never meet again. No Logical Explanation by Daughter of Saturn 13. I wanted to share this weird experience I had when I was younger that pops in my head time and time again. It's left me confused to this day. I'll give a bit of pretext before explaining this so you get the full grasp of everything. I grew up in the woods with no neighbors and completely surrounded by federally protected land from the wildlife refuge. We were the only house on this long stretch of road that led to the parkway, so besides cars passing by, it was very isolated and secluded from society. Let me also tell you that I knew those woods like the back of my hand. I knew every tree and was outdoors from dawn to dusk, even sometimes sleeping in a tent outside. I was a wild, feral child and always wanted to be outside rather than indoors. So, let me explain this weird happening I came across one day. I was around 9 or 10, and I believe it was around September. It was a gloomy day with off and on rain showers all morning, and that was my favorite time to go out and walk around the woods. Everything always felt fresh and serene as you could hear the sound of raindrops tapping on the leaves, and the blue jays cawing from all over, and there was this awesome smell of cedar trees and damp soil. I had made my way to the woods directly behind our house and walked behind a huge brush pile and immediately noticed something so freaking strange and unexplainable. There was this large stump from a tree that had been cut down, and on top of the stump was this decorative foil that was pink on one side with silver foil on the bottom. It was covering the entire top of the stump. On the foil was yellow Easter eggs that you would find in Easter baskets, and they'd been spread around the top of the stump that was wet and limp. There were like 3 plastic Easter eggs as well, and some jelly beans scattered around the yellow grass with some chocolate eggs wrapped in foil, mostly eaten with just the wrappers crumpled up. Everything was wet and looked creepy as the backdrop of gray sky, rain, and nothing but trees in an eerily silent forest set the scene. What immediately freaked me out was that Easter had happened months and months before, and the scarier thing was that none of that stuff was there the day before. So who put it there, and why? Remember, I didn't have any neighbors or people around, and it was located on a part of our property that had a huge brush pile covering that area, making the area a blind spot. And everything behind that whole area went right into the wetlands, and was all a dead end. The only entrance to our property was from the driveway, which was on the opposite side, and everything else was surrounded by marsh. Whoever had set that up was trying to stay hidden and out of sight. I mean, the scene is so burned vividly in my head, and always creeps me out and leaves me with more questions than answers. Hemlock House by The Ginger 55. To start things off, my grandparents bought a unique fixer-upper house in the early 90s. The house was built in the 1800s in the small farming town of Hemlock, Michigan. It's right off the main thoroughfare through town. The house was really cool, honestly. It's actually 3 houses in one. The original house was a one-room homestead type of house, which became the kitchen, bathroom, and pantry. Then the owners built a second section of the house, which became the dining room and office. And finally, the biggest, most modern part of the house was the living room, parlor, foyer, and downstairs bedroom. This part of the house had a second story which had a master bedroom and 2 other bedrooms. The master bedroom had an attached nursery that also had a hall that led to a furnace room. The property also had an outhouse, shed, chicken coop, and a barn, but that's not really important. It just shows you how old the property is. You can really tell the town grew up around the house and a few others in town. The original family owned the house until after the early 90s when my grandparents bought it from the youngest member of that original family, who at that time was in his 80s and about to move into an assisted living home. The house was in a state of disrepair when my grandparents moved in. When they moved in, their family consisted of my dad and 2 aunts. My oldest aunt moved out soon after because she was an adult, not for any ghostly reasons. So when renovations on the house started, it was my grandpa, grandma, dad, and aunt. As renovations began, my grandpa changed. When the previous owner moved out, he left a lot of personal belongings in the house, and instead of throwing them away or donating them, my grandpa put the previous owner's belongings in boxes and put them up in the nursery. He then contacted the family of the previous owner and became friends with them. That behavior was quite odd for him because he's a very shy and reserved person, and to find sentimentality in other people's belongings was quite odd for him, or any in my family. One day, while painting the kitchen, my grandma, alone in the house, felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned around expecting to see my grandpa, but no one was there. She always told me that she never felt scared by that because the hand felt like it was almost giving her a pat on the back or a gesture of approval in the renovations. A part of the renovation involved taking out the fireplace and chimney in between the kitchen and dining room, so for about a month there were loose bricks in the kitchen. One morning before school, my dad, who was about 12 at the time, was alone in the house. At the time, he was the last person to leave the house in the morning. Both my grandparents and aunt left about an hour before my dad had to leave for school, so my dad was alone for around an hour most mornings. He was sitting on the couch watching TV in the living room when he heard a faint scratching sound. He said it sounded like dropping sand on tile. So he turned down the TV and tried to listen closer as the faint sound got closer. Suddenly, a brick flew into the living room from the dining room and rolled into the middle of the floor. He ran out of the house and never stayed in the house alone again after that. Because this was the 90s, my grandpa had one of those big shoulder-mounted camcorders that he recorded home movies with. Around Halloween one year, my dad and aunt were going through their home movies when they found a new tape that was unmarked. They decided to watch this mystery tape. The video on the tape was of my grandpa wearing the previous owner's wedding tuxedo, just standing in front of the camera in the tux. And after that, the renovations began to slow down. That same year on Halloween, my grandparents hosted a haunted house. One of the spooky decorations was a coffin with a skeleton in it. The skeleton was wearing a wedding dress. The dress was the dress of the previous owner's wife, who had had a lobotomy in the 50s and had lived in an asylum since then. The next day, the family contacted my grandpa and told him that she had died that night. And after that, renovations slowed to a halt, and my grandpa became distant and uninterested in anything that he had liked before. He was a completely different person. Soon after this, my grandparents got divorced and my aunt moved to Kansas. My dad and grandma moved into a townhouse the next town over. There's a lot more to this story. I lived in that house as a kid and had a lot of experiences, and my dad and I only recently made the connection that there was something in the dining room that didn't want us in the house. We both describe it as eyes watching you from the dining room. No matter where you are in the house, the dining room is always watching and was pissed that you were there. After their divorce, my grandpa moved out of the house and remarried. He basically went back to normal after leaving the house. My grandma still owned the house after everyone left, so there it sat, half renovated and abandoned. My aunt moved back from Kansas with her fiancé and bought the house from my grandma. The two of them moved in. Soon after, she developed a habit of hoarding animals. Soon the house was full of cats. The half-renovated house became full of cat feces and clutter. My aunt and her fiancé married and moved out to New Mexico. After leaving, my aunt went back to normal. Then, my oldest aunt, who moved out before the creepy stuff started happening, moved into the house with her family. This is where I start remembering stuff in the house. I was about 4 or 5 when they moved in, and the house was still full of cat feces and clutter, as well as still being half renovated. My oldest aunt and her family left rather quickly after moving in and never really gave an explanation. My grandma then moved back into the house, still full of cat feces and clutter, and now both of my aunt's belongings and the original family belongings were cluttering the house. The upstairs was inaccessible due to the amount of boxes and random hoarded items. My grandma never mentioned any paranormal experiences from that point on, just occasionally mentioning the house had spirits. This is where stuff gets creepy again. My mom always told me about how when I was a toddler I would always talk about the sparklies that followed me in the bathroom and kitchen. She said I'd talk about them only at my grandma's house and nowhere else. I do have vague memories of seeing what basically looked like the stars you see when you hit your head, and that's what the sparklies looked like. But again, it is a vague memory, and it's just my mom's retelling of her experience with me. And on top of that, she said I used to have an imaginary friend that I only talked to in that house, that I called the man, but I don't remember that at all. She says it freaked her out, but she figured it was just me being a creepy kid. My parents got divorced in the early 2000s, and my dad and I moved into the house for about 1.5 years. My dad deep cleaned it and made the upstairs livable for us. During that time, we would take all of the random trash and hoarded items and just burn them in a fire pit in the backyard. But from the backyard, I always had a feeling that someone was watching me from the upstairs window in the back of the house. No matter where I was in the yard, I always felt that there was someone watching from that window. It was around that time, probably around 2007, when my dad and I started noticing that no matter the time of year, the upstairs kid's bedroom window would always be about 3/4 of the way open. We'd never heard it being opened, but if we left the room for more than a few hours, the window would just be open. I was 6 at the time, so I didn't really have any concept of ghosts or hauntings, but I definitely felt when the vibe of a room would change. I'd be in the living room playing with Hot Wheels or whatever, and I'd feel the room go cold, and then I'd look into the dining room. As I've mentioned, the dining room was the scariest room in the house. I mean, nothing ever really happened there, but any time that we were within eyesight of the room, it felt like it was watching us. I would always sprint from the living room to the kitchen to get to the bathroom and vice versa, and the light in the dining room stayed on 24/7. What prompted me to tell this whole story was a conversation I had with my dad about 2 weeks ago, where he told me that he too was freaked out by the dining room as a kid, and even as an adult avoided it. He described it as 1,000 eyes watching from that room. My dad did decide to continue some of the renovations my grandpa started in the 90s. He started by putting insulation in the walls upstairs. One night, his girlfriend at the time was helping him with this, and he got a phone call. So he just stepped outside to talk, and she stayed upstairs working with the insulation. While she was up there, she heard my dad come back up the stairs, and then she saw out the window that my dad was in the yard still on the phone. There was nobody else in the house at the time. My dad repainted the house and cleaned up a lot of the clutter and garbage scattered around. But in 2008, we moved in with his girlfriend and left the house. My grandma lived there for a few more years without incident until 2014, when she moved in with her parents to take care of my great-grandpa, who had dementia. She basically packed up his suitcase and abandoned all of her belongings in the house. She still owned the house until she died, but she never went back. Truth is, she loved the house. Between 2014 and 2019, my friends and I would go over there to ghost hunt and smoke weed. It was always the spot where I'd be like, I know a spot. Whenever we ghost hunted, we never really captured anything except for the creepy vibe from the dining room. But it was always fun to tell the scary stories from the house and then show my friends the place from all the stories. My grandma died in March of 2019, and the whole family went to the house to gather her belongings and get it ready to be sold. The whole time, my dad would talk about how nice of a house it was if we had just fixed it up, and how we really could make it a super cool house. But he fought off the pull of whatever latched onto the other owners of the house. I even felt and still feel like it could be a super cool house if it got fixed up all the way. But the attraction of that is so much stronger in person. It makes you feel like you need to have it and fix it up. My dad sold the property in late 2019 and new people moved in a couple of months later. I drove by the house the last time I visited home, and sure enough, the same upstairs window is open and the house is back in disrepair. You can tell the house was under renovations, and the renovations once again halted. I'm 22 now, and I still get freaked out when I think about that damn dining room. Funny thing is, I miss that house. Uncle Josh note, sounds like Christine, the car that you don't want but you have to have. Thanks for a great story. My New Friend Turned Out to Be a Cult Leader by Kate. This all started on one of those Meet New Friends apps. I'm not just a huge loser, I swear. I moved to my current city during the pandemic and have a work-from-home position, so it just hasn't been the prime circumstances for a social life. I matched with this random girl, and we'll call her Annie. I can't remember if I saw her first or vice versa. Honestly, I was paying more attention to the profiles than the pictures, and she seemed okay. Spirituality came up somehow. I can't remember how this happened either, and to be fair, it could have been either of us. I'd recently been more seriously following Norse paganism, but it wasn't something I was seeking to explore with other people. It's mostly a private thing, and not to mention my own beliefs are more metaphorical. But that doesn't mean I'm closed to the experience entirely. So when she mentioned having an LGBTQ neurodivergent pagan femme coven, I was like, okay, wow, that's either very specific or very broad. But hey, why not? I thought it would be fun. So we agreed to meet first before I went to the event. One weird thing that stuck out in our text conversation was that her partner was in some bizarre Scientology rehab. At first, I assumed this was a place where one recovers from Scientology, laughing my ass off, but I did ask her if her partner was a Scientologist. I didn't get an answer. We only met for an hour to have coffee. I think more red flags would have popped up if we had had more time, because the little things that went off on my radar were things that weren't that weird. Like there were explanations, or I had just decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, and my dumbass didn't ask about the Scientology thing. I kept meaning to Google Scientology rehab, but I just kept forgetting to do it. I've since Googled it and can't find anything about rehabilitation for ex-Scientologists, so I wish I'd done that sooner. There were, however, other things that stuck out. They were relatively benign out of text, but putting everything together in retrospect makes me feel dumb. For one thing, she wouldn't answer any direct questions about herself, and not for lack of asking. I'm the kind of person who is conscious of when the attention is all on me, so it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't learn anything about her really. Most of what she said had to do with her spiritual awakening. Her spiritual awakening itself sounded weird as fuck. She said she'd had a realization that she was like a lighthouse that was drawing people toward their personal enlightenment. And okay, I did think that was weird, but like, she's from California, I don't know. Maybe that's normal. I just chalked it up to her personal beliefs being whatever they were. Reincarnation came up, and reincarnation is a big part of paganism, although Asatru additionally focuses on your ancestors. She told me she didn't think she had any past lives and is a new soul, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but okay, whatever. Not my circus, not my monkeys. The vaguely supernatural element she placed on herself was strange, but I know a lot of people want to feel special, and that didn't mean I had to believe it. At one point, I told her about this random woman I met at a pagan festival who tried to con me. She wanted to charge me so I could be under her wing or whatever. I didn't need anyone to protect or guide me, so I declined. But as I was telling this story, I could tell Annie was conflicted. Like she wanted to agree, but didn't. Finally, she said something blasé like how it was only inappropriate because the student should choose the teacher. So I clarified that I did not want to be a teacher. Her responses were very mirroring, and I'm not a moron. I was getting a weird sense that she wasn't being honest with me, that she was telling me things that I wanted to hear, and told myself she was probably just nervous. I do have a strong personality. I'm very independent, so I can understand if someone wouldn't want to go up against the things I said at our very first meeting. I know, I was just dumb at that point, but I didn't want to be paranoid. I don't trust people easily, and I know that, so I was trying to loosen up and be more chill. Yeah, big mistake. I went to the event. Immediately, it was weird, y'all. Immediately. The second I stepped foot in that house, I was uncomfortable. It was filled with people, but completely silent. Everyone was looking at me, and I was laughing and saying hi, and no one was, really responding. And there I was, awkwardly dropping my keys and phone while everyone just watched me. Eventually, I took a seat on this short couch because there was no room in the large circle they were all in. It was a very small living room, and there were 20 people circled up. There was a cushion on the couch, so I sat on it, and the leader started talking. And as she was going on, I was looking around at the people there. Well, I was curious. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the leader trying to look at me. The girl sitting in front of me was partially blocking our view of each other, so the leader was leaning over and trying to meet my gaze. Finally, I felt awkward enough to shift over so that I was leaning against the arm of the couch. Staying perched on a fucking cushion was uncomfortable by that point, so I shifted off and spread out to be a bit more comfortable. The leader ended the speech with, "So, spread out, I guess," which was clearly directed at me. It was said with some humor, though, so I wasn't sure what to make of it. Everyone introduced themselves in their own unique brand of neurodivergent. I'm ADHD, but I guess I don't subscribe to labels beyond the requirement to stay medicated. I've been medicated since 2015, so this isn't a new diagnosis for me. That was the only question we got asked about ourselves beyond our names. The leader guided us through this meditation, and people were making these weird breathing sounds and hums. I get it. It was spiritual, right? Unfortunately, my ADHD ass couldn't focus to save my life, and it was impossible for me to follow the guided meditation. I didn't understand how anyone with actual attention issues could listen to past trills and deep nose breathing. So I was sitting there with my eyes closed and barely paying attention, because I couldn't. But I did hear the leader say that we should think of anything we wanted to ask her, or needed from her, and that got my attention. What the fuck would I need to ask her? Other than where the snacks were, because I paid $8 and I didn't see a single snack. Once the meditation ended, Annie and the leader walked around to give us material for an activity. Annie gave me 2 long pieces of twine, and the leader gave me 2 sticks. As the leader was handing me the sticks, I asked her where the snacks were. She was like in the kitchen, on the table, where snacks tend to be. I'm a dry, sarcastic person, so I thought it was her brand of humor, and I laughed and played along. Oh, right, I think I'll find them. Literally, she was deadpan, unsmiling. "Mm-hmm," was all she said, and then walked away. So, stupid me thought she might just be like that. But then I saw her laughing with the other girls and realized something was off. As the activity commenced, she went back over to Amy and started stroking her back, kissing her hair and giving me this creepy smile. Yeah, it was weird. I was so uncomfortable, I wanted to get up and leave. But I couldn't. Why? Because of the damn activity we were doing. The activity was the last straw. They wanted us to think of something we wanted to discard that brought us pain. Then they wanted us to feel how bad that thing made us feel as we slowly twisted the piece of twine around the stick. That shit I would only ever do with my therapist. Obviously, people were emotionally melting down before too long. I wasn't comfortable doing the activity for obvious reasons, so I sat there awkwardly with the sticks and string in my lap. I was the only one not doing it, and it was obvious. But because I wasn't doing it, I had the opportunity to watch Annie and the leader, and it was chilling. Annie was doing some weird pyramid thing above her head with her arms. There were a lot of references to her as being a lighthouse or some sort of guiding figure throughout the meeting. She was the only one who wasn't doing the ritual other than the other leader. They were both running it. And suddenly it occurred to me, as it probably already has for y'all, that Annie had been just using this app to bring people into this group. She was the only person who seemed to know everyone else, yet no one there knew each other. Even the name of the group now made sense. They weren't being specific, they were casting a wide net, and I had this big realization in a handful of seconds. It made my stomach turn. So yeah, I was done, but I couldn't get up because people were sharing their experiences and shit, pouring their hearts out. That was the most fucked up part of it, in my humble opinion. There was no reason to do a releasing ceremony that forced people to feel their trauma, especially at the very first meeting. It was also inherently manipulative, because it required people to let their guard down. Then these other two could save the day by showing people how to release the very same pain they just inflicted. But that isn't the fault of the people there, so I didn't want to disrespect them. Like, people were sobbing on top of my shoes I left by the door. I had to wait for the best time to ask someone to pass them to me, and finally I got up and told everyone I had to go to the car, and took off. I texted Annie and told her I wouldn't be back, and that I hoped that she found her people. Just make sure that you're not her people. Be really careful of any spiritual ceremony or practice that demands vulnerability from you, especially directed by people who don't know you beyond a name. Annie, let's not, under any circumstances, ever meet. Again. And if y'all ever hear the term neurodivinity, run. If ADHD made me divine, then I'd be on my 94th incarnation by now. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're so inclined, please give this video a like, a thumbs up if you will. Leave a comment, let me know what you thought of the stories. Tell your friends, and maybe even become a subscriber if you're not already. You can follow me on social media, links to that are in the description. And if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page or consider purchasing some Campfire Crew and Uncle Josh merchandise. There's a link to my storefront at tpublic.com. 2 new designs just went up this week. There's a Chupacabra one, as well as a Bigfoot one. That's in addition to the other stuff that's there, and more designs are on the way. And real quick, if you have a true scary or crazy Thanksgiving story, I'd love to hear it. Get something out right before Thanksgiving next week. Time is of the essence, so if you've got something, send it as quick as you can. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.